It was a cold, moonless night when the rumors about Maria, the silent queen Giordano, began to resurface in the dark corners of the city. A woman known for her icy resolve and brutal power, Maria ran her criminal empire with an iron fist, her eyes cold and unyielding. People feared her not just for what she could do, but for what no one had ever seen her do. She was a ghost, a shadow that moved unnoticed, but when she wanted you to see her, you wished you never had. The night was especially eerie in the rundown part of town where the neon lights flickered like broken promises. The smell of wet pavement and old whiskey lingered in the air. A loud crash echoed from a nearby alley, followed by hushed whispers and the sound of boots tapping against the concrete. Inside a decrepit building, four men huddled around a table, discussing a deal that would bring them an unimaginable fortune. They were nervous, knowing the risks of crossing Maria. But greed clouded their better judgment. One man, Tony, sat on the edge of his chair, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "She's been quiet too long, fellas. And that's what scares me," he muttered. "You know what they say about Maria. No one survives her wrath. No one." The others exchanged nervous glances, their fingers twitching around the handles of their pistols. They had heard stories. Maria didn't just kill people, she made them disappear, vanishing without a trace, like the smoke from a burning cigarette. And no one ever dared to ask questions. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and the dim light from the street lamps barely illuminated a tall figure in a black trench coat. The room fell silent. "Gentlemen," came the voice. It was low and smooth, but there was something unnerving about the way the words slid off her tongue, like ice scraping against glass. The door clicked shut behind her, and the darkness seemed to close in, leaving no escape. Maria Giordano stood in the doorway, her silhouette almost blending into the shadows. The light was too weak to reveal her face fully, but they could see the faint glint of something sharp in her hand. A dagger, perhaps? Her gaze swept over the men, calculating, silent. She hadn't said a word yet, but each one of them could feel the weight of her presence, suffocating the air. Tony swallowed hard, his throat dry. What do you want?" he asked, his voice quivering. Maria took a step forward, the heels of her boots tapping with deliberate slowness on the floor. Her movements were fluid, predatory, like a cat closing in on its prey. Every second dragged on, stretching the silence until it became unbearable. "I came to see if you were ready to pay your debts," Maria said quietly, her voice as sharp as a blade. There was a brief, excruciating pause. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew this was no ordinary collection. Maria had a reputation for making things personal, things that involved pain. And worse. You don't understand," Tony stammered, standing up now, his hands trembling. "We have the money, just give us time." Maria tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Time," she repeated, stepping forward once more. Her gaze locked onto Tony's, and for the first time, the dim light caught her face, an unsettling, beautiful woman with skin so pale it looked almost unnatural, her lips painted in deep crimson. Her eyes, though, they were the color of storm clouds, swirling with something much darker than the night itself. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Maria moved closer, her fingers brushing against the back of a chair. Every muscle in Tony's body froze, and in that moment, the floor seemed to shift beneath him. Without warning, she snapped her fingers. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to twist in unnatural ways, creeping across the walls like living things. The men gasped. The lights flickered violently and went out, leaving them in complete darkness. The sound of footsteps echoed in the room, slow, deliberate. They could hear her breathing now, almost too close for comfort. But Maria never spoke. It was the smallest gesture that broke Tony's composure. The sound of her fingers snapping again. In an instant, the men felt something cold and sharp against their throats. Maria's blade was at Tony's neck. Her breath was icy, as though it came from the depths of a grave. "You're all going to regret this," she whispered, her voice almost like a caress. Then she withdrew the blade, and the room flooded with light once more. But the men were no longer where they had been. A soft laugh echoed from the corner of the room. Tony, eyes wide with terror, looked down at his body and realized with growing dread that he was no longer alive. He was something else, a shadow of his former self. His face was twisted in pain, his mouth open in a silent scream. He could feel himself fading, vanishing into the void. Maria's laughter rang in the stillness of the room, low and haunting. "You thought you could escape me? You thought you could break the rules? No one escapes the queen, not even in death." The other men were now gone, too, their bodies dissolved into nothingness. Only the echoes of their panic remained, bouncing off the walls like a distant memory. Maria stood alone, her figure now illuminated in full, casting a long, unnerving shadow on the cracked walls. She turned, her face expressionless as ever, and left the room as quietly as she had entered. The door clicked shut with a finality that resonated in the men's forgotten bones. As the city outside continued its dark, restless pulse, no one spoke of Maria Giordano again. Not because they didn't know her name, but because they understood that saying it might summon her again. And in the world of shadows and whispers, some things are better left unsaid. Her reign would live on. The silent queen ruled, and in her silence there was terror,